You're watching Grim. I'm Rachel Haywire, and I endorse this chaos.
Of course you can call me Daddy, and if you want to follow me on Facebook, you can find me at james.desborough, Postmortem Studios, all one word, JD Writer, and JGD Games. I realise I'm a little bit late to the party here, but I want some of those sweet channel views by discussing Shadowdark, or as I've taken to calling it, Dark-Goose. It's got a lot of attention. There is a lot of heated discourse. It has earned a shit pile of money on Kickstarter, and it's hard to understand why exactly. And this has caused a great deal of consternation, conspiracy theories, and so on. We've discussed it on The Week in Geek on T-Shirt Historians channel. Go and subscribe. And there's been various threads on social media and elsewhere about it. But so while the discourse around it is much more interesting to me, I think it's worth having a look at the game itself first. So I downloaded the Quickstart and had a read through. And I think what we have here is not really an old school game per se. It's where old school games have gone back to BECMI usually, and worked forward with modernizations and different ideas and presentations and so on, building on that old platform. Here, rather, we have something that is started with 5th edition and worked backwards, removed things, stripped things out. So it's effectively 5e basic rather than an old school game. And it's supposedly distanced from 5th edition and the Open Gaming License, but that doesn't really show in the book. It seems very much to draw on the Creative Commons SRD for 5th edition. So the idea that this is not an open game, that this is not a D&D derived game anymore, is pretty much out the window, really. It is licensed under its own license, and it has no morality clause, so you can pretty much do whatever the hell you want with it. So that's a positive, I suppose, if anyone wants to move and ride the coattails of its momentary success. You can. So, when it comes to character creation, it's all pretty basic and common. You have ancestry rather than races. Tiresome, I know. And there's a lot of pandering art choices as well, and the example characters are kind of pandering choices as well. But you can let it go. It's just the way of the world these days. It retains alignment, which is interesting, since Wizards has been kind of moving away from that for a while, and then moving back towards it, and then moving away again. As you level up as a character, you have level titles, which is nice, because as it was in the old school games, you can say, oh, I'm a squire rather than I'm a level 1 fighter. You know, it's a nice little genuinely old school touch. There are backgrounds which will be familiar to you from 5th edition, but they're more to do with how you roll on things, really. It's a little bit more applicable than the 5th edition backgrounds, which tend to just give you a grab bag of stuff. So the backgrounds in this are a bit more like something like, say, the traits in Scarlet Heroes or something similar to that. It's flavor text, but it has a sort of game effect. Helps compensate for some of the problems with a very tightly scripted and ruled game, such as you'll find here. You'll find the familiar 6 statistics, armor class, etc. It'll all be very familiar from 5th edition. They have a simplified encumbrance rule where you can carry a basic number of items. We've seen that in all manner of games, including old ones like Dragon Warriors, for example. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an approach, but it's nothing new, I guess. You have talents derived from your ancestry, your class, and your background. Nothing really new here either, particularly, but it can make things somewhat interesting, and it's somewhat simple compared to a laundry list of racial abilities, feats, class abilities, and so on. Though some talents are obviously tied to ancestry, or your class, or your background. A lot of this stuff is determined by random tables. I'm not particularly a fan of random tables, especially when they seem to be very strongly or even prescriptively encouraged as they are in this game. They're good for inspiration. I think they're more important as a Games Master tool for coming up with stuff on the fly. But random character creation, beyond rolling your statistics and choosing where they go, random talents and randomly determining what extra ability you get as you level up, not so sure about that. It's 3d6 for stats, which is interesting. It's issued the 4d6 drop the lowest, but you must have it says an optional rule, but you must have one stat at least at a minimum of 14, it suggests. But the bonus spread for your stats is normal, so you are going to be somewhat underpowered compared to 5th edition D&D, but the challenge ratings on things, the difficulty ratings on things are a little bit lower. Ancestries, races are for the most part what you'd expect, but with some semi-random addition of Goblin for some reason as a playable race, but otherwise everything's going to be familiar here. It has a compressed experience point system. It's always level times 10 XP to get to the next level. So, yeah, I have no objection to that. Juggling thousands and thousands always seemed unnecessary. And games that have used compressed XP systems, like, again, Dragon Warriors, have always been better in my book. But hey, what do I know? So system-wise, it uses the familiar advantage-disadvantage mechanic. It uses a d6 decider. If anything's going to be sort of random, yes, no, does the torch go out when you drop it sort of thing, you just roll a d6. 1 to 3, one thing happens. 4 to 6, another thing happens. Or you could toss a coin or whatever. That kind of idea seems to have turned up in the discourse a lot more lately, and coincidentally in older games that I've been reading, where they tended to say that players can come up with some stupid plan, and so long as you roll a 6, it happens. I'm not sure about that. In either case, I think you can make up your own odds for that sort of thing. Luck tokens exist. They can be given out for good role playing or doing cool stuff or whatever. Excuse me. And they work basically like inspiration. It's a free reroll. You can only have one luck token at a time, but you can trade them around. So, yeah. The unique selling point, though it's not really unique, or necessarily much of a selling point, in my opinion, of Shadowdark is real-time tracking, which got the Bro OSR very excited and excitable. Basically, time is supposed to pass on a one-for-one basis much of the time. That's the default. Though the book then goes into considerable detail telling you all the exceptions to that when it doesn't happen like that. So it doesn't necessarily seem particularly convinced of its own ideas when it comes to that. And the idea is that there are 10 rounds to an hour, which seems kind of absurd when you consider the speed at which combat can go. And everyone only gets one action per turn. There's no action economy such as you would see in D&D or Pathfinder. What it does use are timers. So there's a constant set of timers that tick down, that replenish certain abilities, seem to replenish some spells, though it wasn't clear which or when. Keeping track of all those timers seems a bit finicky, and I doubt most people will end up using them, really. And breaking everything down into turns seems to me that it will be rather structured and strictured. What are you doing this turn? Oh, I'm talking to blah. You know, it feels like it would suck a lot of the roleplay life out of everything and make the gameplay much more strategic and board gamey, especially with the very strongly assumed default that you're going to be dungeon crawling. If you want to do that, you might as well get Advanced Hero Quest or something, which will fill that need a lot better, in my not so humble opinion. But random encounters will show up or be rolled for once every hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours, depending how dangerous or difficult the area you're in is. There are morale rules, which is nice to have, I suppose. If you kill half the enemies or you whittle down a big enemy to half their hit points, they have to make a wisdom save against a difficulty of 15 or have it away on their toes. Presentation-wise, quite a lot of the stuff in there is stock art, at least in the Quickstart rules. Good stock art, mind you, but I think if people have shelled out collectively, well over $600,000 at this point, I'm not sure exactly how much higher it's gotten, but I think they might be expecting a lot more original art, but I don't know what the final books are going to look like. So it's not a review because it's not the final game, so I'm not going to give you any scores. The design is pretty sparse, kind of large print for the quick start. Not sure whether that's going to be the same case in the main books. If so, they're going to be pretty bloated, I think, for the amount of content that will actually be in there. My chief criticism really is that there is nothing new here. Whether you're coming from the OSR, whether you're coming from 5th edition, there is nothing here that is innovative or new or particularly interesting. And that's why what is more interesting to me is the discourse around it. How on earth did this game, which is really just yet another basic bitch, old school-ish clone of D&D, raise this much money? And a lot of it seems to be down to networking, and that certain high-profile YouTubers have taken an interest in Shadowdark for one reason or another, or have been involved in Shadowdark for one reason or another. And there's a whole host of factors that may be at play here, some of which might sound impolitic if I raised them. I'm sure you can figure it out for yourself. But, some people just strike it lucky when it comes to promotion like this. There doesn't need to be a conspiracy. There just needs to be a circle of friends speaking up for each other and using their platforms to present each other's material to a wider audience. There doesn't need to be anything nefarious going on. But it is galling that this thing has made so much money when it doesn't do anything new. I mean, that's an argument that could be levelled at the OSR as a whole, that it's constantly churning out slightly different iterations of the same old game system over and over again. But there is innovation, systems-wise, presentation-wise, all manner of ways that the OSR games and their fans have moved the medium forward and done something different and interesting with it here and there. There is nothing here that is actually new, and I think massive success off the back of what doesn't appear to be anything innovative or particularly good or particularly well executed. That annoys people, right? It's unfair. It is unfair. There are a lot of people out there who are more deserving, who go unnoticed, who get excluded because they're part of the OSR, and the OSR undeservedly has this reputation. Just recently, someone was going off trying to tell people that I was a fascist associated with the OSR, yet again. Ironically, against the backdrop of me being in heated arguments with actual fascists for a couple of weeks on my YouTube comments. But yeah, they accuse other people who are just common old garden conservatives who I disagree with violently, but, you know, they're not Hitler, they're not the end of the world. But there's this discourse in the cool kid circles that the OSR is just full of dinosaurs and horrible bigots and all the rest of it. And then someone was telling me the other day that they were listening to people talking about this in their hobby store, saying, oh, finally an old school game that we can play, a safe one. as if the OSR was somehow this hotbed of misogyny, bigotry, racism, and all the rest of it, but it only really exists in these people's minds. But that could account for some of the success, the negative marketing towards the rest of the OSR, the rest of the gaming community as a whole, in fact, and then this cashing in by being made by someone who isn't part of that community, who isn't offering anything new, but is offering something more milk toast and anodyne. And if that's what you need in order to be successful, then I don't know that I would want to be successful. Not that I understand why I get pegged in with the OSR people. Anyway, it's a minimal part of my output, but there you go. So, at the end of the day, I think this is a bit of a Morkborg situation, except Morkborg was innovative in terms of its presentation and its art, if nothing else, even if it was all style and no substance, really, when you got down to it, and the game system rules and so on didn't really live up to the heavy metal aesthetic that it had. Shadowdark is just another OSR game, really, but with nothing new to recommend it, and coming from the opposite direction, coming from 5th edition and stripping things back, rather than starting from BECME and building things up and modernising them. I have no interest in getting it now. There's a few bits and bobs here I like. I guess it's a unique combination of bits and pieces from different sources, but there's just really nothing to recommend it. Even its unique selling point, real time, is something that has been in the hobby for a very long time, and which most people discarded because it was unwieldy and often didn't make sense. And even Shadowdark backs off from that. So I honestly don't know, but I don't think there's any need for a conspiracy or anything. Sometimes people just get undeservedly lucky or have powerful social networks that compensate for an absence of true artistic, innovative talent. Take that for what you will. Zang. Imagination is a deeply personal game about depression and its effects, intended to help people with invisible illnesses to broach the subject and explore it in a way in which they can have power over it. Imagination is set after the fall of mainland Britain to a strange reality breakdown. The barriers between imagination and reality, dreams and nightmares, have shattered, and strange things dreamed up by people caught in the event teem across the land. Only those whose minds are already broken can hope to cope with exploring, understanding, and combating this strangeness for the sake of the huddled refugees that sit and wait and watch from the smaller islands around the coast. A game of mental illness and art using the description system as used in Neverwhere. This game is available free, so please promote, download, host and spread as far and wide as you can. Available at post-mort.com and drive-thru-RPG.
Une manie de vieux garçon, moi j'ai pris l'habitude d'agrémenter ma solitude aux accents de cette chanson. Quand je pense à Fernande, je bande, je bande. Quand je pense à Félicie, je bande aussi. Quand je pense à Léonore, mon Dieu, je bande encore. Et quand je pense à Lulu, là je ne bande plus. La bandaison, papa, ça ne se commande pas.